Welcome to Season 2 of Liberty's Leading Edge Conversations. I'm your host, Nozipo Shabalala. Now, this series focuses on the future of work. As the relationship between people and organizations evolve, work and workplaces have become more than just the places we go to work, but really where we go to experience work. And so the topics in this series have been intentionally curated to shift the conversation away from the mechanics of employment and a lot more towards the dynamics of the human experience. And so together we are surfacing and sharing insights that are shaping the benefits industry, both for employers and for members. In today's episode, we turn to the question of mental health at work. This has become a critically important conversation as we ask the question, what does it really take to build a healthy work environment? And we know that healthy work environments are the difference between how people perform and remain engaged at work, and even whether they choose to stay. I am so excited about the two guests that we have in studio with us today. I have the founder and director of Colette Strategic Solutions, that's Colette Buerta, with us. And she's really going to be talking to us about how mental health and healthy work environments really contributes to performance overall in any organization. And with us is Dr. Maru Ace. Now, Maru looks after organizational development at Nabantu in his capacity there as a director. And one of the beautiful things that Maru does is that he looks at the underlying patterns that really give us the granular experience of the everyday work experience. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Colette, I'm so excited that you're here with us because I think you sit in a very interesting space where you have an overview of how strategy and culture are key drivers of performance. I'm interested in, when do you see the signals that mental health is no longer a well-being issue but has become a core culture and strategic issue in an organization?
So it's interesting because these days we definitely pick it up with employees within the organization in the ability to make decisions, how they perform in a team, the team dynamics. We do a lot of work in terms of team dynamics, and you find more dysfunctional teams. Your turnover is higher within organizations, so you battle with retention. And we see people resigning without jobs. And that lots of times is then directly linked to a choice that they might make in terms of their own mental health and the demands of the workspace. So there's lots of factors now that you can't just classify mental health anymore as an employee assistance program that you list somewhere in your annual report. It actually becomes a day-to-day strategic problem that the organization has, and that they have to create the environment that actually addresses that.
Colette, I think that opening answer is actually really, really important, because while we might anticipate that you'll talk about performance and retention, two of the things that really stand out for me, one is around decision making and the inability to actually own decisions. Speaks a lot about the culture of a particular organization, but also the action of resigning without a job also speaks a lot about where the headspace is of that particular individual. We are going to get an opportunity to double click on some of these, but thank you for putting them on the table so early on. Maru, let's bring your voice into this conversation, because you too actually sit at a very exciting place where you're looking at leadership, you're looking at human behavior, but you're also studying what I would describe as the deeper underlying patterns that make up for the experience at work. What are you seeing in terms of how people are experiencing work from a mental health perspective?
So absolutely what Colette has said. So definitely those trends are 100% on the table. And what we're also seeing is that companies are shifting the way they look at the employee life cycle. Okay. So they're now looking at mental health wellness even before a person starts, whether it's through amazing apps or making sure that they've got access to the right support that they need. So it really is looking at the full employee life cycle at the moment that's top of mind. And then this huge thing around psychological safety.
Sure.
So it's a topic that's come up in the last couple of years and has really grown more intensely. Where employee wants to know they are valued, they are safe, they're able to speak up, and their managers support them in that.
I don't doubt that psychological safety is going to be a core part of this conversation, because I think it really is the threads that make up the tapestry of an organizational culture. But just staying big picture a little bit, and I want to make my way back to you, Colette. one of the other things that we're seeing is an integration of mental health into what I would describe productivity and retention issues. What would you say is the core driver of this? Why do we now have to consider mental health as we look at what actually is driving productivity, and also consider it when we're thinking about how do we retain the people that we've attracted into the organization?
So firstly, if you look at just attracting people, like Maru is saying, is that people now in the interview wants to know how's the environment. So when you start interviewing individuals, it's now not you interviewing them anymore, they're almost interviewing you. So it's a choice which they make when they want to enter your organization. But what you then see is if the environment doesn't allow for psychological safety and doesn't allow for speaking up and being able to, for the individual to feel safe in that environment, we see it showing up definitely in their engagement in the organization. It's as if you have a little bit of disengagement with the employees because they're actually driven by fear.
Yeah.
And then you don't have the productivity that you need. So, and what we see is that almost paralyzes the individuals. So they do not make decisions as effectively because they're actually scared to make them.
Yeah.
But and that can be because of environmental things within the organization, but it's also things that impact them externally.
Yeah.
And the external factors are playing in the organization as well. So if you just take the current situation with the fuel prices, the impact that has on an employee worrying about their budget at the end of the month, and that mental capacity that actually fills up for that individual, they can't fully show up in the organization because that occupies them. And I mean, that's something that organizations deals with every day.
I think you've actually opened the window to two very important conversations that I really don't want to rush past. I want us to go back to that scenario where we're in the interview and the prospective employee is raising the question of, is your environment psychologically safe? The organizations that have done the work, what are some of the things that they would typically point to as evidence of an environment that is really psychologically safe? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but also as you take us into this world where the external environment is actually coming into the organization, as you talk about, the mental capacity to deal with oil prices and budgets at the end of the month. Again, organizations that are really doing that well and accommodating that reality well, what can they point to as evidence of this is what it looks like?
Yeah, so I think it is a difficult one because lots of organizations want to be high performance organizations, and with that culture there's a specific trend that plays out. High performance cultures are always fast, it is very stressful, but the employees ask about that, or the potential candidate will ask about that. And I think the only way actually for me, and in my opinion, is leadership has to demonstrate it, and there's a bit of a vulnerability that needs to be there. So you have to be able to see it, you have to walk the talk, otherwise it just becomes window dressing. So it becomes a cultural aspect.
Yeah.
And so with everything, I mean, things like fuel prices, although it's impacting the individual, it's also impacting the organization. So the organization has to be careful with what they implement, and they have to be consistent in accommodating those individuals with the problem that they're facing. But thinking about that, the real things that you can do is just the upskilling in terms of the financial awareness. So you can use your employee assistance programs for that to help people to structure their finances better, and also say, listen, we're in it all together, so how can we make this better, and try and find solutions for that.
And you've so beautifully then integrated benefits into this conversation, because what I'm hearing you say is that what the employer can point to are the different programs that are available within that organization that are evidence of how they're really taking the broader environment into consideration. Maru, the culprits that workplaces are up against: burnout, anxiety, a lot of stress, and as Colette has said, just everyday economic pressures that might be bringing into the work environment. How do these touch on the engagement that one would anticipate or expect from employee, and how do they drive engagement within the organization?
it is a difficult one to answer because engagement means different things for different companies,
Sure.
right? But for me, it boils down to this idea of how do we handle uncertainty, because uncertainty is going to always be there. There was a beautiful quote by Brené Brown where she referred to saying, we live in this age of constant uncertainty. So for any company to then go in and say, well, what does that mean for us? It would mean, how do we handle that uncertainty? How do I showcase that, as you've also asked the question? How do we make sure that we are okay in those uncertain times that are coming ahead of us? So difficult one to answer, but each company normally then defines what would work for them into it, right through from profit, environmental aspects, how the building is laid out, how individuals are engaging. So yeah, there's quite a few ways how that is looked into. Yeah.
Let me stay there, Maru, a little bit, because I think, as you've pointed out, uncertainty is such a big and sometimes even vague concept that can mean different things to different organizations. And what I'm almost hearing you say is that there's an opportunity here for benefits to almost be the guardrail that gives some degree of certainty to say, I might not know what the outcome of this particular place or experience that I'm in, but I know the support that is available for me to navigate and find my way through. Would that be an accurate understanding of how uncertainty and the benefits world come together?
100%. So in other words, I'm not really sure even what the future holds at the time of an interview, but I can show you these are the benefits that we as a company have taken on. So whether that's the well thought out wellness programs or the apps that we use or the benefits and the companies that we partake into, and really showcasing that it's out there for individuals to make use when that uncertainty shows up. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a very helpful framing in the way you've unpacked it as well. But the conversation also seems to focus on organizations that are quite proactive in how they think about a healthy workplace environment, and those that tend to be reactive because they're waiting for either data or incidents, which is the worst case, taking place before they put in a policy and so on. If you could give us a sense about the difference between the two, how does a proactive organization look like that is proactively thinking about healthy workplaces, and what would a reactive organization look like? And I asked this question because you had also put on the table the question of leadership behavior, and I would imagine that the leaders in these two environments behave in very different ways.
Yeah, so I think if I can start with the latter, so a reactive would be your employee assistance program gives you a lot of stats. It says that your people are very stressed, and now you're trying to put a program in to try and fix that. The proactive part, and that's something that I firmly believe in, is that when we look at our leadership and appointing people, managers, or people that lead other people, I think the important thing is the skill set needs to look a bit differently. We tend to, specifically in high-performing environments, we tend to be very task-focused.
Sure.
So the conversation that we should be having, those real conversations that we should be having, is actually not happening because there's just so much pressure in the environment to deliver certain things. What we find is in a space where you actually take the time and actually see the human that's sitting in front of you, you can actually recognize the human behavior up front. So you see a pattern. You see that this person isn't acting exactly the way that they always do. They're not engaging with the topic. They may be not engaging in the meeting, and then you can pick it up. There's certain other things, like he's been saying, is that there's now these days so many apps that you can use. AI is in front of us. If your team is on an app that has maybe a bit of a coach in it, or you do frequent small surveys and assessments, you can definitely pick up mental health issues way in advance, that you can see someone's distressed or there's something wrong. But that human interaction, I think, is very important, having the real conversations and not just the work conversations, and actually finding out what's going on with that individual.
That's your sweet spot. It's the human behavior that really is what you're focusing on. And I think we can all agree that we've moved on from the world where we used to say, I come to work, not to make friends. And you almost expect it to have a connection, to have a relationship. I wonder, Maru, what are your thoughts on how do we support leaders to be able to be proactive, to be able to spot the distress that Colette speaks about? And is it about, turning them to technologies? Is it a combination of technology and programs? Or is it possibly also about giving them the capacity for connection and conversation? What have you seen working really well?
Definitely. So the idea around a conscious leader. So a conscious leader is someone that can self-reflect. So before we get to the technology, before we get to the different connections, is a leader that really models what they need to show up into. So that idea of a conscious leader is somebody that can look at everything from a point of view of saying, how does this affect me? How does this affect my team? How does this feel for my team? What does it mean for our profit lines? What does it mean for our bigger communities we serve? So it's really looking at from a larger perspective, but it starts with self-awareness. And a lot of that has been, I would like to say, boiled down into this idea of mindfulness. And mindfulness in previous years was this woo-hoo idea, and now we understand from science it's actually exceptionally important to have within a corporate culture, because it's an idea that I am present when I need to be present with my team members.
I love the reference of the woo-woo idea, because I can almost remember the eye rolls that would come in when we start talking about mindfulness, and yet now you can't even talk about leadership in the absence of mindfulness, in the absence of presence. But there's another challenge. So assume that the leader, Maru, and I want to stay with you on this one, assume that the leader has done the work of developing their capacity to be mindful, their capacity to be present, to see the distress in their team. They have the connection and the conversation. But we still have people who don't feel that they can actually use what's being offered by the organization. I'm keen to understand, what are those barriers that, although you might have the greatest employee benefit programs, their usage is low. The extent to which the employees are pulling them off the shelf and engaging with them and signing up still requires quite a lot of work and uptake. What is that invisible barrier that we're up against?
It's a good question, and I think Colette really touched on it, and it's around this leadership modeling or people manager modeling, meaning if I can experience that my manager is okay with talking about wellness, saying use this app, use access to it, use the benefits that we do it, or talk freely, openly in meetings and discussions to say we have these various benefits available, and not just talk about it, but also how are they experiencing it, meaning physically using it themselves, into that idea of modeling. That's the first barrier. And the second barrier is around how we design corporates in general. We've seen a lot around how hierarchies are falling, meaning that companies are becoming more flat structured, and within that flat structure there's larger groups, larger teams, which makes it even more important that that modeling takes place. So the access to the wellness component is absolutely low at the moment, but we know because it's also, there's stigma involved, there's what will people say, what will people think. So it's a bit of a more of a larger community also problem, or a society problem, than just a corporate one.
I want to stay with you both here a little bit, because I think, Maru, as you raise the stigma, for me the question becomes, how do we normalize accessing our benefits program? How do we normalize getting help when we need it? And I'm hearing you saying there's a huge part of it that is about leadership modeling. But I would imagine at the end of the day, it's still an individual decision that needs to be made to go and access that help. And the reason why I'm harping on about this a little bit longer than I should be is the psychological safety conversation that you have spoken about. How, Colette, can we design organizations in such a way that they signal safety? Over and above the leader modeling safety, is there ways that we can signal that this is a safe place, and where there's help, we actually really mean that the help is available to you?
So, I mean, it is the leader as well, but the stigma also comes in where, if I say I'm not coping, will I be treated differently? And if you have a culture where you can speak up freely early on in the process, where you can say, listen, I have a problem, I'm actually not coping, or I feel burned out, or I'm really run down, or the pressure is just too much, and I can do it early on in the process. You can turn it around so much faster. People feel safe, but the moment that they feel they're speaking up and then they get treated a little bit differently, or maybe you're not made for this role, then that's a problem. And I find when the leader actually uses the employee assistance program and they're using the tools that's given to them and they speak freely about it, so there's a bit of vulnerability that shows that I'm also human, and just like you, I'm also impacted by something like a fuel price, and just like you, I also have problems, and speak freely about that and then address it. So and then you turn it around so much faster.
Yeah, I keep trying to get the leaders a little bit of slack, and the both of you are like, absolutely not. We're staying on the leader and the modeling of leadership behavior. But I love what you say about the fact that high performance culture and raising your hand to say I need help do not need to be separate sides of a coin. It can be, those things can coexist at the same time. I can be in a high performing culture and I can need help because I can feel there's a misalignment between the capacity of what I need to deliver on and my ability to do that. One of the words we haven't used yet, which I know is coming in this conversation, is resilience. Because once you talk uncertainty, Maru, the next thing is how do we then create or nurture workforces that can navigate that uncertainty, but that requires some degree of resilience. And Colette, I want to stay with you on this question and to say, how does mental health, and in particular mental health programs, support programs, actually contribute to building resilient teams and a resilient organization?
So, I mean, I think it's like anything. If you practice it, you get better at it. And if you practice using the help that you have and coming back to self-awareness, I really believe that that's the starting point of anything. If you don't have self-aware people that don't know when the red light comes on and I know that I'm overstretched at the moment, then I won't be able to stop it in time.
Yeah.
But if I know that I need assistance and I can ask for it, then at a sooner time that there will be assistance and I will be able to carry on. Resilience, I also think, and I might be corrected, but I also think it's a personality trait. It's something that you have to practice, and some people will call it sooner and say this is actually not good for me. And that doesn't mean that they're not resilient. It just means that they choose differently. And I think to build that resilience in a team, you must have self-aware individuals, and the team must be able to see each individual for the person that they is and what they actually contribute in the team.
Sure. There's so much that you've said there that I don't want to lose, and Maru, I want to bring it in here because what I'm almost hearing Colette say is that there is an underbelly to just pushing for resilience. And in fact, what you're trying to create is a depth of awareness within the team so that those that feel that their current uncertainty is a positive challenge, that they can power through, they can navigate it, that they do that. And those that feel that actually this is too much for me, I need to either find a different pathway or I need to get help in order to, that resilience is actually not this blanket approach that we used to have before, which is the idea of get knocked down 7 times, get up 8 times and just push through.
Yeah.
There's a deeper understanding of what it means to be resilient at work.
Definitely, and it has to. So to add on what you're saying, there's also around authenticity. So how am I showing up into the work? Am I able to, and getting again to the psychological, very practical safety portions? Are we then creating the spaces where we check in with one another to say, are you okay? Like starting a meeting off to say 1 out of 10, how are you feeling today? And really caring about the individuals. But at the same point, understanding there's jobs to be done and there's outcomes to be reached, right? And there's goals and end goals and outcomes. But the level of authenticity, I would almost say, outweighs resistance or persistence.
Yeah.
Because if you're not being able to show up authentically, it takes a lot of energy away from you to reach your actual goal, because then you are performative, you're not really showing up as what you should be showing up as, and that goes for both the leader and the employee that steps into those spaces. And the moment you start to perform in the ways that you shouldn't, that is when things like burnout shows up easily, then the real Taki hits the tar with mental health, right?
Yeah.
When you are performing and not having to just be yourself.
Sure. And again, I keep coming back to, you talk about high performance cultures, and here's an important distinction between, being yourself and being your performative self. And actually being yourself is what helps you contribute meaningfully in a high performance culture. We've been circling psychological safety for a while, and I know so many people, when you when you start using that language, the eyes start rolling up, because it's like, okay, but what is it? Let me start with you, Maru. What is a working, practical definition of psychological safety that you've seen that just makes it real, makes it accessible and tangible, not only for leaders in an organization, but even for the teams that are being led?
I would summarize it as, can I be myself without being judged, but at the same time understanding that you work in a larger team or community? And I totally agree with you when people start rolling their eyes with psychological safety, because I also honestly believe that people are misusing it. So they hide behind the idea of psychological safety because it's one of the most easiest things to say, well, I don't feel safe in this space. But nobody necessarily then unpacks that.
Yeah.
So for me, the psychological safety is simply meaning, can I speak freely? Do I have permission to talk? Am I allowed to talk? Am I allowed to challenge? But also then, on the flip side, can someone challenge me and my thought process? So it goes both ways, right? But yeah, that's my definition of psychological safety.
I love how you're highlighting for us that we don't move in isolation. We're still performing or contributing in the context of other people. So yes, can I use my voice, but can others use their voice in my presence? What is the link, practically as well, Colette, between psychological safety and performance?
So ideally, and this is a topic I'm very passionate about, ideally you want each individual to show up as the best version of themselves. So the strengths that they have, that you want them to bring it to work and to engage on that. And I think that's where the magic comes in, if an organization can get it right and say, this is what this individual is talented at, and this is how they form part of the team. So forming those teams with enough diversity so that they can actually perform. It is great when you have teams that is very self-aware, they know what they are good in, and then in the team bring that to work. So that authenticity is amazing when you see that, and that team then complements each other much better because they know where their blind spots are, and you give them a language that they can actually help and advise each other. So you bring relationships within the team, they can address it with each other, and then that creates a safe space. So what you will find in organizations lots of times is that you maybe don't have psychological safety everywhere, but you have it in specific teams, and those teams seems to show up a lot different than a team that doesn't have that.
Sure, and I can only imagine what that calls on for a leader who's trying to establish psychological safety if it wasn't there before. Because that's where I want to go next, and I want to go there with you, Maru, is to say, we know that toxic workplaces now, it's not just a flippant thing to say, oh, this is a toxic workplace. It's a real business risk. If that perception is anchored within the team and the organization, the risk of losing your top performers becomes all the more real. How difficult is it to shift an organization that might have previously been considered toxic to a healthy, thriving place of work?
I wish there was a magic bullet. I wish there was a magic bullet to say, right, it would be a quick journey. It can be turned around quickly if there's a lot of factors taken into place.
Okay.
Right? So if the training is put into place, if we work on culture, if we work on team dynamics, if we work on structures, the designs of the actual teams, and as Colette has mentioned, is that moment of being able to speak into it. But the reality of it is, it's not just a flip switch, because it normally exists in pockets. So it's not as if, very rarely is a whole business toxic. And ironically, it is sometimes, again, leaders that are toxic, or people, managers that are toxic, and then creating a toxic environment, which is unfortunate. But to change it around, absolutely doable. Is it quick? Not necessarily. It is quite a complicated factor to change around, but it can be done, and it has been done, certainly. Yeah.
I don't know what methods you use with your clients, Colette, but I can imagine there must be some sort of diagnostic that you would do in contexts like this and be able to hold up a mirror to a leadership team, to a leader, to say, this is what your people think. This is how your people are experiencing you. And I would imagine that's a lot more powerful way of landing the toxicity in the environment in a way that there's evidence. I want you to take me to those conversations. What is the typical reaction that you would get from a leadership team that gets that mirror held up to them? And to Maru's point, what is the journey of transitioning out of that towards a more healthy environment?
So, I mean, like you said, it's never easy. So there is no one size fits all, but you have to have a mirror. So there is obviously lots of surveys and audit tools that you can use. You can use the 360s and all of that. But I think the moment that there's awareness that there is a toxic culture and there's a willingness to listen to it, I think that's almost the first step in the right direction. It's almost like an alcoholic saying, listen, we want to change. So there must be a willingness to change and then to actually receive the feedback, because sometimes that feedback it's tough. I firmly believe that there's no human that actually wakes up in the morning and say, listen, my intent is bad and I want to create a toxic environment. Mostly people wants the best for an organization or for their team, and they just don't understand the impact. And it comes back to showing them that then.
Sure.
So they must be open to receiving it. So the most important thing for me is actually to create the environment where they feel safe enough to receive that information. And it's not an attack on the leader or attack on that department head. It is actually some good feedback for change. And then if they're willing and they receive it, then normally that goes with a lot of coaching and some interventions. And sometimes it's just really saying, but my intent was never bad, to make my team feel like that, and being really honest about it, and then just trying to explain that to them, and that there's awareness from all sides to that.
I mean, I love the positive frame you put around the opportunity to transition away from that toxicity towards a more healthy environment. But Maru, I can also see a world where everything now gets put in the well-being basket, and that, just do sort of a well-being program of sorts, and it'll sort everything out, instead of, the invitation of doing the actual deep inner work. I'm keen to understand, how do we make sure that we don't fall into that trap, trying to make well-being the silver bullet for every single thing, when other things are probably deep cultural issues. There might be leadership incapacities that need to be dealt with. How do you help your clients see the difference?
So it's sometimes quite interlinked. So,
Sure.
But definitely, I 100% agree. Everything can't be just put under wellness, right? If it was that easy, we would have all had the magic recipe. But each organization is unique in how it shows up. So when we do those various assessments or surveys or go deep into it, we can pinpoint where the problem lies. Does it lie within a culture? Does it lie within a wellness component? Does it lie into the management styles, specific individuals? And we're able to pinpoint in those details. And because the uniqueness of each organization, it also means that the solution should be unique.
Sure.
It's not a blanket approach, but I 100% agree with you. It's being cautious to understand that not everything is a mental issue or a wellness issue. We know from science, and we know from what the results look like, is that the higher the wellness, or the better spend on wellness, the better the companies perform. Sure. And as Colette has also mentioned, is when it comes into diversity, the more diverse teams are, the better they perform, which then also means that you will have pockets of people that might be lower mentally, or there's various variants on it.
I really appreciate that you've brought the investment lens into the conversation, because one can then look for a very clear correlation between what are we actually spending on ensuring that this is a healthy workplace versus those organizations that are sort of reactive and catching things on the back end. As we begin to wrap up, I'd like to pull us towards the future, and maybe Colette, to start off with you, what do you think is going to differentiate those organizations that are really going to stand out as healthy organizations where employees thrive, where they perform, and they're able to do that while they're being authentically themselves. What's the difference between organizations who get that right and those that are going to be likely to be left behind?
I think for me, if you're going to handle it as a program or an initiative and it falls under the HR calendar and they must just drive it, and there's nice initiatives and activations, you're probably not going to feel the impact. Where if a decision or the decision is made on a leadership level, saying we're all going to embrace this, we're all going to have meaningful conversations with our employees, we're going to create diversified teams. We will make sure that we hire correctly, we bring in the right capabilities, and then assist teams to speak up in a safe environment.
Yeah.
So create a culture that's then conducive for that. I think they're going to be ahead of the curve with all the change that will be coming in the next bit.
So I like what you're saying, and that is, it matters whose KPIs this is sitting on. Because if it's just sitting on the HR exec's KPI, then it's just the HR exec's problem. But if we make culture all of our problem, then we all own the results of the culture that emerges, whether that is a toxic culture or a super healthy culture that also takes into cognizance mental health. And of course, the other point you make is that if it's going to be a program, an initiative, and nothing more, that's all it's going to be, actually. Maru, as you think about the future and you think about all the change that Colette is also referring to in the future world of work, what do you think is going to be the real differentiator between healthy work environments and unhealthy work environments?
Definitely more conscious organizations. So companies and organizations that know how to handle change regardless of what it is, because the world will continue to change. We don't know what the future will look like. But if we can equip individuals and organizations to handle the change regardless of, that's where the differentiator is going to come into it. But I do hope that it is more conscious organizations in the future.
I could not have ended this conversation on a better note. It is all about conscious organizations that have the ability to navigate the change that is certainly always going to be on the way. It's been an incredible conversation here at Liberty's Leading Edge Conversations. And remember, we always set out to look at how the relationship between the places that we go to experience work is changing as the relationship between people and organizations change. Ours is just to lift up the insights and to share those both with employers and with members. I hope that this conversation has set you on a path towards a healthier organization, a healthier culture, and of course, healthier employees. My name is Nozipho Shabalala. I'll see you at the next one.